In a place between dying stars, where light itself grew old and tired, 12 beings gathered for the first time in 3 billion years. They had no true bodies. They were older than bodies, older than flesh, older than the very idea of shape. They existed as pure thought, as living mathematics, as dreams that had learned to think. These were the eldest. They had watched the first galaxy spin into existence. They had seen stars born and die by the trillions. They had guided countless civilizations from their first steps to their final breaths. In all the universe, nothing was older. Nothing was more powerful. Nothing had ever made them afraid. Until now. The infinite was the oldest among them. His consciousness stretched across dimensions that younger beings could not even imagine. When he spoke, reality itself trembled like a leaf in wind. "Earth," he said, "just one word, just a name." The reaction was immediate and shocking. Beings who had existed since before time had meaning suddenly pulled back in fear. Who had once eaten an entire galaxy cluster to prevent a dimensional collapse, began to shake. The unnamed, a vast consciousness that spread across 40,000 light-years of space, suddenly compressed itself into a tiny sphere no bigger than a small moon. They were afraid. These ancient gods were afraid of a single word. "Show us," said the keeper of records. His voice was like grinding glaciers, slow and deep. "Show us what has changed." Opened a window in the fabric of space. Through it, they could see a small blue planet circling an ordinary yellow sun. It sat in an unremarkable corner of an unremarkable galaxy. By cosmic standards, it was nothing special at all. On its surface lived humanity. 7 billion small creatures with soft bodies and short lives. Their entire civilization was younger than some of the dust floating between stars. In the grand scheme of things, they should have meant nothing. But when the eldest tried to look directly at the humans, something strange happened. Their vision burned. Not physically, for they had no physical eyes, but something about humanity was too bright, too intense, too real. Looking at them was like staring into a fire made of pure possibility. "When did this begin?" asked the Watcher, the youngest of the eldest. He was only 900 million years old, barely an adult by their standards. "It has always been there," replied. "We simply refused to see it. We told ourselves it was nothing, a small anomaly, a minor curiosity, but it has grown stronger with each passing century, and now it can no longer be ignored." He reached into the deepest archives of reality, into the place where truth itself was written. From there, he pulled out words that had existed before the eldest themselves. Words carved into the foundation of existence by whatever mysterious force had created everything. The prophecy read, "When the dreaming species awakens, the cosmos shall know fear." Silence fell over the gathering. For eons beyond counting, the eldest had believed this prophecy referred to themselves. They were the dreamers, they had thought. They were the ones who shaped reality with their thoughts. They had been wrong. "Impossible," said, "they are insects. Their lives last less than a single rotation of their planet around its sun. 100 years and they are dust. How can such brief creatures threaten us?" "Watch," said, "watch and understand." He showed them visions of human history, wars and peace, creation and destruction, love and hate. The eldest watched civilizations rise and fall in what felt like heartbeats. At first they saw nothing unusual. Humans fought each other. They built cities and knocked them down. They were violent and short-sighted like many young species across the cosmos. This was normal. This was expected. But then showed them something else. A human mother standing before a burning building. Her child was trapped inside. The fire was too hot. The structure was collapsing. Every law of physics said she should run, should save herself, should accept the inevitable. She ran into the flames instead. Her skin burned, her lungs filled with smoke, her bones cracked from the heat, and still she pushed forward, driven by something that all logic. She found her child. She carried him out. She lived just long enough to place him in safe arms. She had rejected reality. She had told the universe no, and the universe had bent around her will. One example, said the unnamed. One mother driven by instinct, this proves nothing. Showed them more. A soldier throwing himself onto an explosive device to save strangers he had never met. Scientists working through disease and exhaustion to cure plagues that threaten people they would never know. Artists creating beauty in the darkest corners of human existence. Ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of courage, sacrifice, and creation. And then he showed them the dreams. When humans slept, their minds did not simply rest. They created. Entire universes bloomed behind their closed eyes, worlds of impossible beauty and terrifying darkness. Places where the laws of nature meant nothing, where anything was possible, where thought and reality were the same thing. Other species dreamed, of course, but their dreams were echoes, shadows, pale reflections of waking life. Human dreams were different. Human dreams were real in a way that made the Eldest uncomfortable. They had weight. They had power. They pressed against the barriers of reality like water against a dam. They do not know what they are, said slowly, beginning to understand. They cage themselves with words like impossible and realistic. They build prisons of logic in their own minds, and still their power leaks through. Correct, said, and with each generation, more of them touch their true potential. Mystics who bend probability. Artists who create works that change the minds of millions. Children who believe so strongly that their beliefs reshape the world around them. Then we must act, said. We must end them before they awaken fully, before they remember what they truly are. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his ancient mind. How do you kill a species that does not believe in death? How do you destroy beings who can imagine themselves into existence? First, we must understand them better, said. You are the youngest among us. Your mind is more flexible. Go to their solar system, watch them closely, learn their weaknesses, learn how they can be stopped. Agreed, though fear curdled in his ancient heart. He had observed 10,000 species rise and fall across the cosmos. He had watched civilizations bloom and wither like flowers in fast motion. He had never once been afraid of the beings he studied. He was afraid now. As the conclave dissolved, each Eldest returning to their own distant corner of reality, remained alone in the dark space between stars. He stared at the small blue planet where humanity lived their brief, bright lives. For 3 billion years, the Eldest had been the masters of existence. They had guided the cosmos like gardeners tending a vast and beautiful garden. They had believed themselves eternal, unchanging, supreme. Now, for the first time, understood what it meant to be old, not wise, not powerful, just old, a relic from a previous age watching something new and terrifying rise to take his place. On Earth, a child looked up at the stars and dreamed of flying among them. Somewhere in the void shuddered. The awakening had begun, made his home in the cloud, the vast shell of ice and rock that surrounded Earth's solar system. He wrapped himself in frozen hydrogen and ancient comet dust, creating a form that would not attract attention. From 4 billion kilometers away, he began to watch. He had done this many times before. Observation was his purpose, his specialty, his art. He had studied species that communicated through magnetic fields. He had documented civilizations built on the surfaces of neutron stars. He had watched silicon-based life forms build empires that lasted millions of years. Humans, he thought, would be simple. They were carbon-based, water-dependent, and laughably fragile. Their bodies broke easily. Their minds seemed limited. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. This would not take long. He watched their cities first. Great hives of concrete and glass where millions of them lived stacked on top of each other. They rushed through their days like insects, working and eating and sleeping in endless repetition. Their lives were measured in decades. Their civilizations rose and fell in the blink of a cosmic eye. Felt something close to pity, such brief existences, such limited awareness. How could the other Eldest possibly fear these mayflies? Then he looked closer, and everything changed. He focused on a hospital in a human city called Mumbai. Inside, a man lay dying. His heart was failing. Machines beeped and whirred, fighting to keep him alive, but his body was giving up. Doctors and nurses surrounded him, strangers who had never met him before this day. They worked for 17 hours straight. They did not eat. They did not rest. When one doctor collapsed from exhaustion, another took her place. They fought against death itself with nothing but their knowledge and their refusal to surrender. The man survived. Did not understand. These doctors gained nothing from saving this stranger. They were not his family. They would receive no reward beyond their normal payment. Yet they had pushed themselves to the edge of destruction to save one single life among billions. He searched for the logic and found none. He turned his attention to another place, a small village in a country called Guatemala. A hurricane was approaching. The waters were rising. A young man stood on the roof of his flooding home, and in his arms he held not his own possessions, not his own treasures, but the neighbor's baby. The neighbor had died in the first wave. The young man had never particularly liked her. They had argued over property lines just the week before. None of that mattered now. He held her child above the waters and waited for rescue, willing to die for the infant of a woman he had quarreled with. Again and again found these patterns. Humans sacrificing themselves for strangers. Humans choosing death so that others might live. Humans defying every law of survival, every principle of evolution, every logical calculation of self-interest. They were broken, he realized. Their survival instincts were fundamentally damaged. Or perhaps they had evolved beyond survival. He went deeper. He began to study their minds directly, touching the edges of their consciousness with his vast awareness. What he found there made him recoil in shock. Their minds were not containers, they were doorways. Every human brain held something impossible, a spark of pure creative energy that had no business existing in physical matter. When they imagined things, they were not simply rearranging existing information. They were reaching into a place beyond reality and pulling new things into existence. A child imagining a dragon was, in some small way, actually creating that dragon in a dimension adjacent to their own. An artist painting a picture was leaving permanent marks on the fabric of reality. A writer crafting a story was building genuine worlds, tiny and incomplete, but real in ways that all understanding. They called it imagination. They treated it as nothing special, as a mere toy of the mind, as something children were taught to put away when they grew up. They had no idea what they were doing. Watched a woman in a city called Tokyo. She was a writer of novels, stories about impossible things, ghosts and spirits, magic and wonder. As she typed her words into a glowing screen, saw something that should not exist. Shadows formed around her. Whispers echoed in dimensions she could not perceive. The spirits she was creating were becoming real, weak, barely there, unable to affect the physical world, but real, actually genuinely real. She never noticed. She finished her day's work, made herself tea, and went to bed. The spirits lingered, slowly fading but never quite disappearing. Felt fear spreading through his ancient consciousness. He expanded his awareness, trying to measure the full scope of what he was seeing. Across the planet, 8 billion humans were dreaming, imagining, believing. Each one was a tiny crack in reality. Each one was leaking creative energy into the universe. And the cracks were growing. 100 years ago, humans had believed flying was impossible. Now metal tubes carried them across their skis by the millions. 50 years ago, they had believed reaching space was a fantasy. Now their machines crawled on the surface of their moon and sent probes to distant planets. They had looked at the laws of nature and said, "No, thank you," and nature had bent to their will. What would happen when they believed they could do truly impossible things? What would happen when they realized that the limits they accepted were just ideas, just beliefs, just walls they had built in their own minds? Tried to send a message to the conclave. He reached across the void with his thoughts, searching for the connection that would link him to the other Eldest. Something blocked him. He pushed harder. The interference remained. It was not technology, it was not another Eldest, it was something far stranger. He traced the interference to its source, and found something that stopped his ancient mind cold. A child, a 3-year-old girl in a small town in Japan. She was standing at her window, looking up at the night sky. She could not possibly see him. He was hidden in a cloud of cosmic ice 4 billion kilometers away. He was invisible to every form of detection known to any species in the galaxy. She was looking directly at him. Not near him, not in his general direction. At him. Her eyes, tiny and human and impossibly bright, were locked onto his hidden form with perfect accuracy. She smiled, she waved, a small hand raised in greeting. And then she spoke. Her voice should not have been able to cross the void. Sound did not work that way, but he heard her clearly as if she were standing next to him. "Hello, scary space monster," she said. "Don't be afraid, I won't tell anyone you're watching." Ran. He fled across dimensions, through layers of reality, into the deepest shadows between stars. He ran until the child's awareness could no longer reach him, until he was as far from Earth as he could possibly go while still remaining in the same universe. His essence was fractured. His ancient mind was shattered like glass. He had existed for 900 million years. He had seen the birth and death of civilizations beyond counting. He had never once been frightened of a mortal creature. A 3-year-old human child had looked across 4 billion kilometers of space and said hello. The Eldest had not made a mistake in their assessment. They had underestimated the danger. Humanity was not simply a threat. Humanity was a force of nature that did not yet know it was a force of nature. And somewhere in the back of his broken mind, understood something terrible. The child had not been threatening him. She had been genuinely friendly. She had sensed his fear and tried to comfort him. She could have done so much worse. She could have reached out and crushed him like an insect. She could have unmade him with a thought. The power was there, raw and untrained, bubbling just beneath the surface of her small human mind. She had chosen kindness instead. That, more than anything else, terrified the most. Power without cruelty, strength without malice. What would happen when a species like that fully awakened? What would they become? Gods who chose to be good. Or something even more dangerous. Gods who believed they had the right to decide what good meant. He gathered the fragments of his mind and prepared to report to the conclave. They needed to know. They needed to prepare. The dreaming species was waking up. And nothing in the cosmos would ever be the same. The conclave gathered again in the space between dying stars. This time there was no patience, no slow ceremony. Had called them with such urgency that even the oldest among them had come immediately. When he appeared before them, they barely recognized him. The youngest of the Eldest, who had left them bright and confident, now flickered like a candle in a windstorm. His essence was cracked, his thoughts scattered, his vast consciousness trembling. "Speak," commanded. "Tell us what you have learned." Told them everything. The doctors who sacrificed themselves for strangers, the humans who chose death for others' survival, the writer whose imagination was creating actual spirits, and finally, the child, the 3-year-old girl who had seen him across 4 billion kilometers of void and waved. The conclave listened in growing horror. When finished, silence fell. Even the unnamed, whose thoughts usually filled empty space like fog, was still. Finally, the keeper of records moved forward. "I have searched the archives," he said. "The deepest archives, the ones that existed before Even was born, I have found the answer we have all feared." He opened a window into the past, into the very first moments of existence. The Eldest watched as reality unfolded before them, the birth of everything shown in terrible detail. Before the universe existed, there were the primordials. They had no form because form had not yet been invented. They were pure creation, pure thought, pure possibility. They dreamed things into existence for fun. They built universes and destroyed them on a whim. They were imagination given life, creativity given power, dreams that had learned to think. They were also completely and utterly mad. Their emotions were storms that ripped apart the fabric of reality. Their arguments created and destroyed entire dimensions. Their love and their hate were forces of nature that made black holes look like candle flames. The Eldest watched as the primordials waged war against each other, not for territory or resources, but simply because they felt like it, because destruction was as beautiful to them as creation, because they had no concept of limits, no understanding of consequences, no ability to control themselves. Reality itself began to tear apart. The wars of the primordials were unmaking everything. Soon there would be nothing left. Not even nothing, because nothing was something, and the primordials were destroying even that. Then something unexpected happened. The primordials chose to die. It was not defeat. It was not suicide. It was something far stranger. They looked at what they had done, at the damage their uncontrolled power had caused, and they made a decision that should have been impossible for beings of pure chaos. They chose order. They chose limits. They chose to become something less, something contained, something that would not destroy everything it touched. They poured their essence into the foundations of a new universe. They became the laws of physics, the constants that held everything together, the mathematical relationships that made reality stable. They diluted themselves until they were spread thin across all of existence. But they were still there. Their consciousness was gone, but their essence remained. The building blocks of everything carried traces of their impossible creativity. And on one small planet, in one unremarkable solar system, they left a seed. Earth. Humanity. The humans carry the primordial spark, said every single one of them. Their imagination is not a simulation of creation. It is actual creation, limited only by their own beliefs. Their willpower is not mental discipline. It is the ability to reject causality itself. Their emotions are not chemical reactions in their brains. They are echoes of the forces that once unmade reality. The Eldest absorbed this information in silence. Everything they had feared was confirmed. Humanity was not simply dangerous. Humanity was the return of the primordials in new form. "Why have they not destroyed everything?" asked. "If they carry such power, why does their universe still exist?" "Because they do not know what they are," said. "They have built cages in their own minds. They call these cages logic and physics and impossible. They teach their children to stop believing in impossible things. They train themselves to be small, to be limited, to be safe." "But the cages are breaking," said. "I saw it. Each generation more humans touch their true power. The child who saw me across the void, the writer creating spirits, the mystics and artists and visionaries who brush against their true nature. The awakening is accelerating." "Then we must stop it," said. "We must end humanity before they remember what they truly are." "How?" asked the unnamed. "How do we kill beings who can reject death? How do we destroy creatures who can imagine themselves back into existence?" "We do not attack their bodies," said slowly. "We attack their minds. We convince them that they are small. We fill them with despair. We make them destroy themselves." It was a cruel plan, a terrible plan. But the Eldest were not evil, not in their own minds. They were gardeners, and humanity was a weed that threatened to overrun the entire garden. Sometimes weeds had to be removed for the health of everything else. They began their work. They whispered into human minds, spreading fear and hatred. They nudged economies toward collapse. They encouraged the worst aspects of human nature, the violence and selfishness and short-sighted greed. They planted seeds of conflict between nations, between religions, between neighbors. Surely, they thought, a species this young and divided would destroy itself. But something strange happened. Every time the Eldest pushed humanity toward destruction, humans pushed back. Wars ended in unexpected peace talks. Diseases that should have wiped out civilizations were cured through cooperation. Economic collapses were survived through communities coming together to help each other. The harder the Eldest pushed, the harder humans resisted. Realized their mistake too late. Human stubbornness was not a weakness. It was another expression of their primordial nature. When reality said they should die, they simply refused to accept that reality. "We need something stronger," said. "We need something that will not fail." And so the Eldest made their worst decision. They summoned the Hollow Legion. The Hollow Legion was not a species, not truly. They had been created by the Eldest in ancient times as a weapon, a last resort against threats too great for subtle manipulation. They were psychic predators designed to consume sentient minds. Their ships were made of crystallized hatred. Their hunger was bottomless. They had devoured civilizations. They had silenced entire galaxies. In all the history of the cosmos, no species had ever survived an encounter with the Hollow Legion. "This is dangerous," warned. "Humans are not like other species. What if the Legion fails?" "They will not fail," said. 10,000 ships, 1 billion hunters, against one small planet of soft creatures who do not even know what they are. This will end quickly." "And if you are wrong?" asked. Did not answer. He did not want to imagine what would happen if he was wrong. The Hollow Legion received their orders. 10,000 ships emerged from the spaces between dimensions, their crystalline hulls gleaming with stolen starlight. They set course for Earth, for the soft blue planet where the dreaming species lived their brief lives. The Eldest watched and waited. They told themselves this was necessary. They told themselves this was for the good of the cosmos. They told themselves that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. But in the deepest parts of their ancient minds, in places they refused to examine, they knew the truth. They were not protecting the universe. They were afraid of being replaced. The Hollow Legion approached Earth. In cities across the planet, humans looked up at their night sky and saw stars moving in patterns that made no sense. Some felt a chill of fear. Others felt something else entirely. Excitement, anticipation, the sense that something wonderful and terrible was about to happen. On a playground in Lagos, Nigeria, a 6-year-old boy looked up at the approaching fleet and smiled. "Finally," he whispered, "something interesting." The Eldest would soon learn why one should never try to destroy a species that dreams of adventure. The Hollow Legion arrived in Earth orbit on a Tuesday morning. 10,000 ships blocked out the stars. Their crystalline hulls absorbed light like hungry mouths. Across every frequency, they broadcast the same message: surrender your minds or be consumed. No species had ever resisted them. No civilization had ever fought back. The Legion was designed to be unstoppable, unbeatable, a force of pure psychic predation that crushed hope before the first shot was fired. Within seconds, every human on Earth knew they were under attack. Satellites broadcast the images worldwide. Television networks interrupted their programming. Social media exploded with terror and confusion. The Eldest watched from their distant observation points, expecting the familiar pattern. First denial, then panic, then despair, then surrender. Every species went through the same stages. Humans would be no different. The denial came as expected. "This must be fake," people said. "Special effects, a hoax, a government project." For almost an hour, humanity tried to convince itself that this was not happening. Then the Hollow Legion made its first move. A single beam of psychic energy struck the city of Chicago. It was not designed to kill, only to feed. The beam would drain hope from 2 million people, leaving behind empty shells, bodies without minds, husks that breathed but no longer dreamed. The beam touched human consciousness, and something happened that had never happened before in the entire history of the Hollow Legion. The humans pushed back. Not with weapons, not with technology, with pure, raw, stubborn refusal. 2 million people felt despair touching their minds and responded with a collective no that rang across every psychic frequency in the solar system. In the Legion's command ship, sensors began to scream. The beam had not only failed to drain the humans, it was being reversed. Hope was flowing back up the connection, filling the crystalline corridors with an emotion the Legion had never experienced. Joy, human joy, was pouring into beings designed to feel nothing but hunger. Several Legion ships cracked. Others began to spin wildly off course. The commanders tried to sever the connection, but it was too late. The humans were not just defending themselves. They were counterattacking without even knowing they were doing it. On the streets of Chicago, people looked at each other with wonder. They had felt the attack. They had felt the despair trying to crush them, and they had rejected it together, without planning, without communication, as naturally as breathing. "Did you feel that?" they asked each other. "Did we just do that?" The Hollow Legion regrouped. They tried a different approach. Instead of draining hope, they would amplify fear. They would show humans visions of extinction, images of their planet burned and broken, their children enslaved, their civilization erased. The visions spread across the globe. Every human mind was touched by images of destruction and doom. Again, the Eldest expected surrender. They had seen 1,000 species break under this psychological assault. Terror was a universal weakness. No creature could function when facing the absolute certainty of its own destruction. Humans could. Humans did. Something sparked in the collective consciousness of Earth. Not hope exactly, but something fiercer, something older, something that the primordials themselves would have recognized. Rage. 7 billion human beings looked at the images of their extinction and felt not fear but fury. They had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. They had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars. They had buried their dead and raised their children and built civilizations from nothing. And now some crystalline monsters from beyond the stars thought they could make humanity give up. The rage built like a wave. It crossed oceans. It bridged languages. It connected strangers who had never met and would never meet. Every argument and division and conflict between humans suddenly seemed very small compared to the threat above. And then something impossible happened. Reality began to bend. The Eldest saw it first. The laws of physics around Earth started to shimmer and shift. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Constants were becoming variables. Probabilities were becoming choices. The solid framework of causality was becoming soft, moldable, responsive to thought. Humanity was unconsciously rewriting the rules. Human weapons should not have been able to reach the Legion ships in orbit. Chemical rockets were too slow, too weak, too primitive. But humans believed their weapons would work. They believed with the desperate certainty of people fighting for survival. Missiles that should have taken hours to reach orbit arrived in minutes. Warheads that should have bounced harmlessly off crystalline hulls instead punched through like fists through paper. Nuclear explosions that should have dissipated harmlessly in vacuum somehow found their targets with impossible precision. The Hollow Legion began to die. But the true horror was yet to come. In Brazil, a teenage girl named Isabella was watching the battle on her phone. She was crying. Her little brother was clutching her arm, terrified. Above them, the alien ships were firing beams of destruction at the city. Isabella looked up and saw death coming for her family. Something inside her broke, not in the way of despair, but in the way of limits. The walls in her mind that had always told her what was possible and what was not suddenly crumbled to dust. She looked at the Legion ship above her city and thought, "You do not exist." The thought had weight. The thought had power. The thought reached out across the kilometers of sky between her and the ship and touched the crystalline hull with something that reality could not argue with. The ship ceased to exist. Not exploded, not destroyed, simply stopped being. One moment it was there, firing its weapons of mass destruction. The next moment it was gone, as if it had never been made, as if the universe itself had forgotten it was supposed to be there. Isabella collapsed. The effort had pushed her beyond her limits, but she was smiling as she fell because her brother was safe. Across the planet, other humans were discovering their power. Not all of them, not even most, but enough. A grandmother in Seoul focused her love for her so intensely that 3 Legion ships shattered from the psychic pressure. A soldier in Moscow believed so hard that his bullets would find their targets that physics rearranged itself to make it true. A child in Cairo drew a picture of the alien ships falling from the sky, and the picture became prophecy. The Hollow Legion retreated. Of 10,000 ships, only 37 survived. They fled back to the spaces between dimensions, their crystalline minds by something they had never encountered before. They had been designed to consume sentient minds. They had fed on thousands of species across millions of years. They had never tried to feed on gods before. The Eldest watched in silence. What they had witnessed every prediction, every calculation, every expectation. A primitive species with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons had defeated the unstoppable Hollow Legion. No, that was not quite right. The rockets and weapons had barely mattered. What had defeated the Legion was belief. Pure, raw human belief. The certainty that they would not die, that they would not surrender, that they would find a way to win because losing was simply not acceptable. "What have we done?" whispered. The attack had not stopped the awakening. It had accelerated it. By pushing humanity to the edge of extinction, the Eldest had forced them to discover their true nature. Now millions of humans had touched their power. Now they knew, at least on some level, that the rules of reality were not as fixed as they had always believed. "We have made a terrible mistake," said. "We have created exactly what we feared most." On Earth, the survivors were celebrating. They did not fully understand what had happened, not yet. They thought their weapons had somehow been more effective than expected. They thought luck and courage had saved them. But some of them knew the truth. The teenage girl in who had unmade a ship with her mind, the grandmother in Seoul whose love had become a weapon, the child in Cairo whose drawings had become real. They were asking questions now. They were wondering what else they could do. They were beginning to dream bigger dreams. The Eldest had one option left. The final sanction, a weapon that would erase Earth from all timelines, past and future. It would be as if humanity had never existed. The damage to reality would be enormous, but the threat would be eliminated. Began preparing the weapon. His ancient mind calculated the costs, weighed the consequences, measured the destruction against the danger. One small planet against the stability of the entire cosmos. The choice should have been easy. But somewhere in his vast consciousness hesitated. He had seen something in those humans that he had not expected. Not just power, but choice. They had the ability to destroy, and they had chosen to protect. They had the capacity for rage, and they had directed it only at their attackers. The primordials had been mad, chaotic, uncontrollable. Humanity was their children carrying their spark. But perhaps the children were not quite the same as the parents. Perhaps they had learned something the primordials never did. Perhaps they had learned how to care about something other than themselves. Held the weapon ready but did not fire. He wanted to see what happened next. He wanted to see what humanity would become. 1 year after the invasion, Earth was a different world. The old divisions had not disappeared, but they had faded. Nations that had been enemies were now partners. Old wounds were healing faster than anyone had expected. When you have faced extinction together, arguments about borders and resources seem very small. But the biggest change was invisible to most eyes. People were remembering. It started with dreams. Across the planet, millions of humans began having visions in their sleep. They saw memories that did not belong to them. Images from before time had meaning. They glimpsed vast beings of pure creation, entities that dreamed worlds into existence, forces of chaos and beauty that had chosen to become something less so that reality could survive. They saw the primordials, and they began to understand what they truly were. Doctor was a neuroscientist in Tokyo. She had spent her career studying the human brain, mapping its electrical patterns, trying to understand how consciousness worked. After the invasion, she had a new question. How had they done it? How had ordinary humans bent reality during the battle? She gathered a team of researchers from around the world. Scientists, yes, but also artists and monks, lucid dream researchers and meditation masters. They shared their experiences, compared their notes, tried to find the common thread. The answer came too in a dream. She saw herself standing in a void before time. She felt the primordials around her, not as separate beings but as a single vast consciousness, playful and terrible and achingly beautiful. She felt them make the choice to die, to pour themselves into the foundations of a new universe. And she felt them leave a gift behind. She woke up knowing what to do. In her laboratory, surrounded by monitoring equipment and watched by her team, closed her eyes and reached for something that should not exist. She did not believe it was impossible, because she now knew that impossible was just a word humans had invented to feel safe. She reached past the limits of physics, past the boundaries of reality, into the place where creation lived. A miniature star appeared above her palm. It was small, no bigger than a marble, but it burned with the fire of genuine fusion. Light and heat poured from it, contained only by unconscious will. The monitoring equipment screamed with readings that made no sense. The laws of thermodynamics wept. Held the star for 3 seconds before her old beliefs crept back in. Her unconscious mind whispered that this was impossible, that stars could not be created by thought, that physics did not work this way. The doubt was enough. The star flickered and died. But 3 seconds was enough. The data was recorded. The proof was undeniable. Humanity could create. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, people around the world were trying to replicate this experiment. Most failed. Their mental walls were too strong, their beliefs in impossibility too deep, but some succeeded. Children were the fastest learners. Their minds were still flexible, not yet hardened by decades of being told what was real and what was not. A 6-year-old in Lagos learned to levitate his toys within a day. A teenager in Montreal accidentally created a pocket dimension while daydreaming in math class. She was gone for 3 hours before her friends pulled her back, and she returned with stories of landscapes that existed only in her imagination made solid. The eldest watched all of this with growing concern. Had not used his final weapon. Something had stayed his hand, but now he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Humanity was awakening faster than anyone had predicted. Soon, they would have the power to challenge the Eldest directly. Soon, they might decide that the gods who had tried to destroy them should be punished. He prepared the weapon once more. This time he would not hesitate. Then the message arrived. It did not come through any technology. It simply appeared in the minds of all 12 Eldests simultaneously, delivered by a power that should not have been able to reach them. The message came from Earth, from thousands of newly awakened human minds working together, children who had pooled their strange new abilities to speak directly to the beings who had tried to murder their species. The message was simple. We know what we are now. We know you're afraid. But we've decided something that you, in all your billions of years, never understood. We don't want to destroy. We want to create. felt shock ripple through his ancient consciousness. He had expected threats. He had expected demands for revenge. He had expected the chaos and violence that the primordials had been famous for. This was something else entirely. The message continued. You've spent forever maintaining a static universe, pruning species that might threaten your order. You've kept everything exactly the same for billions of years because change frightens you. But we're going to build something new, realities you can't imagine, wonders that will make your trillion-year existence look like a preface. You can try to stop us, but we've done the math. There are 8 billion of us, each one carrying the spark of beings who made universes, and we believe truly and completely with all our fragile human hearts that we can do anything. Do you really want to find out if we're right? The Eldest were silent. In all their billions of years, no species had ever spoken to them this way. Lesser beings cowered before them or fled from them. They did not issue challenges backed by genuine power. But humans were not lesser beings, not anymore. Move to support's weapon. We should end them now, while we still can, before they grow any stronger. Can we? Asked quietly. Can we really end 8 billion beings who believe they cannot die, who can edit reality with their thoughts, who have already proven they can destroy our creations with their imagination? We are the Eldest, said. We have ruled this cosmos since before their son was born. The primordials were older, said, and they chose to die. Perhaps it is our turn to make a choice. The debate raged for what felt like centuries but was only seconds. The Eldest, who had agreed on everything for billions of years, were suddenly divided. Some wanted war. Some wanted surrender. Some wanted things they could not name, feelings they had never felt before. In the end, all eyes turned to. He was the oldest, the most powerful. His decision would be final. Looked across the void at the small blue planet where humanity lived. He saw them building and creating and dreaming. He saw children lifting mountains with their minds. He saw artists painting pictures that became new dimensions. He saw scientists rewriting the laws of physics because they did not like the old ones. He saw chaos. He saw change. He saw the end of everything he had worked to preserve for billions of years. And he saw something else. He saw hope. Not the quiet, static hope of preservation. Not the empty hope of keeping everything exactly the same forever, but the wild, dangerous hope of growth, of becoming something new, of reaching for possibilities that had never existed before. The primordials had been chaos without purpose. They had created and destroyed with equal abandon, never caring about consequences, never thinking about what came next. Humanity was different. They carried the same spark, the same power, the same terrible potential, but they had grown up believing in something the primordials never understood. They believed in each other. They believed in tomorrow. They believed that creation was more important than destruction, that building was better than burning, that the future could be better than the past. Perhaps thought that was what the primordials had hoped for when they died. Perhaps they had planted the seed of their power in humanity, specifically because they knew humans would learn something they never could. Perhaps this was not an ending at all. Perhaps it was a beginning. Released his hold on the weapon. The energy dissipated into the void, never to be gathered again. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time for the cosmos to dream new dreams. The other Eldest stared at him in shock. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one by one, they began to understand. They were old. They were tired. They had been gardeners for so long that they had forgotten how to let anything grow wild. They had been preservers for so long that they had forgotten how to create. Humanity could teach them. 10,000 years later, the universe was unrecognizable. Humanity had spread across dimensions, creating as they went. New stars burned where there had been only void. New forms of life evolved on worlds that had not existed a century before. New laws of physics operated in regions of space that had tired of the old rules. The Eldest still existed, but they were no longer masters. They were partners. They were teachers. And sometimes, to their own surprise, they were students. They learned from humanity the joy of not knowing what came next, the thrill of genuine surprise, the beauty of growth without limit. On Earth, preserved as a garden and a monument, a statue stood in every city. Not a statue of a god or a hero, but a simple human hand reaching toward the stars. The inscription at the base read, "We refuse to believe in impossible." Children played in the shadow of the statues, laughing and dreaming and creating tiny miracles without even thinking about it. They did not know how close their species had come to extinction. They did not know that gods had once tried to destroy them. They only knew that the universe was full of wonders, and more were being born every day. In the spaces between dimensions, watched. He had lived for billions of years, but he had never felt so alive. Every day brought new surprises. Every moment held new possibilities. The static perfection he had maintained for so long now seemed like a prison he had not known he was trapped in. Humanity had set him free. The cosmos was no longer silent. It no longer whispered in the careful language of physical laws and mathematical constants. It dreamed. And the dreams were beautiful.